Let me say welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from. Welcome to Shaping EDU Unconference 2021, where together we are reshaping wicked problems. We've got a really exciting program for you today. I just want to start by welcoming everyone and also thanking our co-conveners who have made this event possible. Our platinum co-conveners, including Workday. So especially Workday, you'll be hearing from them more today. Workday actually has been with us since day one as a co-convener since 2018 when Shaping EDU was founded. I want to say thank you to our gold co-conveners, Adobe, AWS, Slack, and T-Mobile for education. To our silver co-conveners, Berkeley, Dell Technologies, Microsoft, OLC, Salesforce.org, University of Arizona, University of Colorado Boulder, and University of Pittsburgh. Thank you so much. More than just sponsors, these co-conveners has helped us all design the event as it's about to unfold today. So we thank everyone so much. I'm one of your MCs, Samantha Adams-Becker. I am the Executive Director for Creative and Communications at ASU's University Technology Office. And I also happen to be a co-founder of Shaping EDU. For those that are new to Shaping EDU and wondering what it's all about, have no fear, we'll be giving you a debrief in just a little bit. But for now, we're about to dive into our program. I mentioned Workday, our platinum co-convener, with us from day one since 2018 at the very first Unconference. I want to give the warmest welcome to them. If you don't already know Workday, they're an industry-leading on-demand financial management and human capital management software vendor, a fantastic partner. We appreciate their support. You may be using their tools and products daily, but today you're going to get a chance to also see another side from them. One of our wicked challenges is really about bolstering diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so I'm really excited to kind of set the tone for that wicked problem and many more that we're facing in education. I'd like to introduce you to Carin Taylor, Workday's Chief Diversity Officer. Welcome, Carin. We're so glad you're here with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samantha. And I'm super excited to actually be here today. I'm not sure I can follow that enthusiasm that you and Stephanie stepped into this morning, but I'm going to try. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. As Samantha said, my name is Carin Taylor, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer for Workday. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time going through a little bit of an overview about diversity, just kind of in general, talk a little bit about some trends, where we are today, some things we're doing over at Workday, before I invite a couple of panelists to actually join me in a conversation. So I want to get to the panelists really quickly, but let me cover just a few things. So I am going to share my screen. Can you all see that okay?
Looking good, Carin.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So let me go ahead and get started. So I've been doing this work for a really long time. And I will say, you know, the last 18 months or so have probably been some of the most challenging times that I've experienced doing diversity work. And it's as exciting as it's been really challenging, and not just challenging, it's been exhausting. But we've had a really difficult last kind of 18 months or so, where we've been hyper focused on a lot of the things that have been going on within the DEI space. By the way, I will interchange some terminologies: B and D, which is belonging and diversity; D&I, diversity and inclusion; DEI. Think about them all kind of in the same as kind of a wrapper around DEI. But we've had to go through really some unprecedented times, right? We've had to deal with things like the pandemic and the challenges that brought for all of us over the last 18 months or so. And we're still dealing with those issues. And so things like distance learning has become a real issue and a real opportunity for us as well. So we've been dealing with systemic and overt racism. We've been dealing with equal rights for all people, equity, justice, political unrest. It's been a tough year. And the interesting thing is, as we think about the work around DEI, We also know that it's really evolving. It's evolving in a way that we didn't expect for it to evolve. So if you look at the things on the left here, these are the traditional things that we have been working on from a DEI perspective. So we've been dealing with things like affirmative action. Women in leadership has been where we've made the most traction, but we've also been making some efforts on racial and ethnic diversity. And we're now focused on things like people with disabilities. But these are kind of traditional areas that we've really been focused on from a DEI perspective. But what's evolving are these new things that we're actually involved in as well. So things that are creeping into the workplace, excuse me, like social justice issues that we were not dealing with before in the workplace, multi-generational issues, global diversity is a big deal now, thinking about the differences based on where you are in the world and how DEI shows up for you is very different depending on where you are in the world. Leadership expectations are changing around how do you step into the workplace and how do you lead with things like empathy and compassion instead of only focusing on the bottom line. And so there are all types of things that are happening in this particular space. And the interesting thing is, even if you look at it from an educational standpoint, we're starting to look at barriers and disparities between different groups in terms of how we're all stepping into this place. And so the issues around DE&I are complex and they're layered. And as we continue to bring more and more issues into the fold of DE&I, it's just going to continue to get more complex. So it's really a key area where we need to do some understanding. One of the important things, and this was a survey that was done, or some research that was done by Harvard Business Review. But what they started talking about is the impacts of belonging as well. There are positive impacts and there are negative impacts as well. But things like isolation, how you're actually feeling when you don't belong as a part of your community, that's a real impact for people who are in the workplace or who are in schools these days. The amount of money that we're spending on DEI training is phenomenal. Companies are understanding and people are understanding that we need to invest in this area, but it's actually really costing us a lot of money. But even things on the positive side, like job performance and turnover being, high or low, depending on how you're thinking about it, and things like reductions in sick days are all impacts of how people are actually feeling when they're actually doing the work that they're actually doing. So we've been asking this question, and we've been thinking about this for quite some time. We've been doing diversity work for a really long time, but we haven't made the traction that we've needed to make. And so the question then becomes, why are our outcomes not matching our intentions? And Workday we've been doing a lot of research around this. And so there are a couple of things that we believe. One is that you can't just focus on representation without thinking about inclusion, belonging, and equity. And the other thing is thinking about how do you go from goal setting to actually goal getting. And let me talk about both of these things really quickly. As you're thinking about representation and you're just focused on diversity and you're thinking about just bringing people in, the thing that you could be missing is something that we call the leaky bucket, or those other things that get people to stay. And so as you think about representation and diversity, you can work on that. And that's a key part of DEI strategies. And that does a great job of actually bringing people into your institution or your company. But if you don't actually focus on elements of what's going to actually keep them there, you have the leaky bucket problem. And that is people coming in, but leaving just as quickly because they don't have good enough reasons to stay. And so we believe that when you connect diversity and representation to inclusion, belonging, and equity, you actually have an opportunity to address this issue more holistically than if you were just focusing on it from a representation standpoint. The other part that's important about this is going from goal setting to goal getting. And that means we're setting goals a lot, right? What are your representation goals? How many people of a different ethnicity or gender do you want to bring in? Or how many people with disabilities or veterans do you want to bring into the fold as well? You can set those goals, but if you don't have a strategy for actually helping you to get to those goals, we are finding that a lot of people are not actually getting to the goals. And that is where we find that we're not making as much progress as we possibly could. So we've thought about how you put intentionality behind actually getting to those goals, doing that through making sure that you have a thoughtful strategy, making sure that you've attached the outcomes up early in the goals that you want to try to move, but you also want to make sure that you can go that next level down and identify what are the areas that are stopping people from advancing, and how do you focus there? And then lastly, how do you make sure that what you are doing is action oriented? So we really believe when you think about this from a holistic DE&I perspective, and you have a thoughtful strategy behind how you're going to get to your goals, we'll be able to start to make more traction. So with that, I want to shift just to something that we've actually implemented in Workday, and it's called VIBE. VIBE is our strategy for diversity, and it stands for value, inclusion, belonging, and equity for all. It's important that we put that for all at the end, because we want to make sure that what we are doing is for every single person that we engage with, whether or not it's our colleagues, whether or not it's our leaders, whether or not it's our customers. We want to make sure that as we think about the interactions that we have, they're done on a basis of making sure that we value inclusion, belonging, and equity for all. And what that means really briefly is that we value diverse representation and making sure that there's that mix. We value uniqueness in the sense that we want everyone to come to the workplace and really be thanked and rewarded for their unique attributions. We want to make sure from an inclusion standpoint that we're focusing on the environment and what are the behaviors and actions that we need to do to ensure that everyone feels like they are valued, respected, and included in what we're trying to do. It also means that we value belonging, and belonging is important because belonging gets to each of us at the individual level. And what we want to make sure is that every single person feels a key part of our community. And to do that, we have to get to the heart of how every single one of our employees are feeling to make sure that we're getting to them from a belonging standpoint. And then lastly, we want to focus on equity. Of course, we want to focus on, equity in reference to things like compensation, but we also want to make sure that there's equity of access and opportunity for everyone as well. So as you can see, we look at VIBE very broadly, and that's intentional because we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for everyone to be able to slot in regardless of who you are, where you are, and what your role is within the company. The other thing that I'll say about VIBE is everyone's responsibility. And if you put this in the context of even an educational institution, there's a role for everyone to play. There's a role for your institution. There's a role for your students to lean in and make sure that they are not just wanting to make sure that they themselves are feeling this sense of vibe, but how are they making others feel in terms of how they want others to feel like they vibe as well. So there's a role for your professors and your faculty and your sisters and brothers and your student groups. But at the end of the day, the thing that is most important is that everyone focuses on modeling the behaviors that you want to create to make sure that you can vibe. So we think about this through the lens of it's everyone's responsibility and everyone plays a unique role. And when we all vibe, we all thrive. And that's why it's important to get everyone involved in the conversation. Let me switch really quickly to data and technology, and then let me bring in Sergio and Diane to join this conversation. So the first thing that I want to just kind of introduce or talk about is this notion of intersectionality. And this gets to the data piece, and this is critical because as we think about data and we think about data at an aggregate level, and that generally is how we are looking at a lot of our data, we may not be uncovering some of the challenges that actually exist a little bit deeper down within an organization. And so instead of just looking at how are women doing or how are men doing or how is one ethnic population doing, that can tell you a story. But when you think about points of intersection, race and gender, what level you are within the organization, what grade are you within your educational institution. When you start to layer some of these other points of intersection, you may start to uncover that you have additional issues to try to solve for that may not be shown or experienced at the aggregate level. And what I mean by that, and this is just a quick example of if you were looking at belonging and you wanted to know how your employees felt from a belonging standpoint, and you were looking at the average on an aggregate level, and your belonging was 80%, you might think, oh, wow, that's actually pretty good. But if you introduce points of intersection, what you may then find is that the experience of belonging is not the same across the board for all of your different demographics. And so in this example, you're seeing that your white population is at a higher level of belonging, where your Asian males, as an example, they could be at a lower level of belonging. And so looking at data from an intersectionality standpoint allows you to then pinpoint certain communities where you may actually need to do more work. So in this case, belonging for Asian men you may need to put more focus there. So I think that notion of how you are using data becomes really important. And for us, looking at it from multiple points of intersectionality becomes really critical. And then lastly, technology really does play a part in DEI and the experience that we're having. And if I think about this from an educational institution standpoint, things like distance learning over the last 18 months became really critical in terms of how students were learning, and technology had to play a part in things like even access to learning. If you didn't have a computer, or you didn't have in your location, you didn't have great internet access, that impacted the learning that some students had to actually go through. And so technology, and the stronger the technology is, the better we can actually make sure that issues like socioeconomic issues don't play a part in our students' learning process as well. So we want to think about that. Technology also helps us do things like reduce bias and barriers. So if you can do things like remove identifiers from a resume, as an example, that doesn't allow your bias to show up, technology plays a key role there. Technology also lets us do things like build diverse talent pools. And then lastly, as we think about technology and data, you can use technology and data to make data-driven decisions. And that becomes critical as you're just not thinking about the sentiments that you're hearing there, but you can really make decisions based off of data-driven access to information that you have. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I hope that was helpful. But I'm also going to go ahead and bring in a couple of folks to actually have us, to help us with this conversation. So I'm going to bring in Sergio and Diane to join us.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
How are you? Hey. And so Sergio, we're just going to jump right on into this. Sergio, I'm going to actually start with you, but I'm going to ask this question to both you and Diane. And my first question for both of you is just give us a quick introduction of yourself, and then tell us why DEI is important to your institution.
Yeah. I'm Sergio Mendoza. I've been in the Workday ecosystem for almost 3 years now. And right now I work for WGU, been here for about 1.5 years. I do their DE&I analytics from a Workday standpoint, and provide data on all sorts of DE&I metrics. And so the majority of the data that I run is DEI focused. And there's a big push here at WGU to be able to provide data. We want to become the world's most inclusive university. So that's very important for us. And capturing the different metrics within our employee population is important to know where we are and where we want to go. We believe that education is important, and we want to provide a space for employees to feel comfortable and to be authentic to themselves, while being able to offer opportunities to students, and at the same time have personal and professional growth here at WGU.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Sergio. And then Diane, how about you? Just a quick introduction and why this is important, to Huron.
Sure. Diane Doherty. I have been with Huron for 19 years, and for the last about 7, been leading our employee and community experience team. So all things around how do we engage our employees to want to come to the organization and stay. So obviously DE&I is very high on that list. As Carin said, the last 18 months have been even crazier. But we have as an organization have focused on diversity and inclusion for many years. And we have really thought about, as a professional services firm, it's all about people, very similar to a university institution, and making sure that people come to the organization, they feel safe, they feel treated fairly, they feel respected, they feel connected to one another. That sense of belonging really increases the engagement, which ultimately increases the value both to employees, to our clients, and to the business. So to be able to reach potential, you need that belonging and that sense of feeling like you are a part of a community. So, we have really focused on how do we continue to grow that, to develop that, and make sure that everybody who comes in the organization knows that it's a place where they could really bring their true self, whatever that is, and be part of something, bigger and better.
I love that. Thank you so much, Diane. So Sergio, let me come back to you and let's kind of get back to this conversation around technology. So, sometimes technology can act as an obstacle when supporting DE&I initiatives. Can you just explain some of the limitations or challenges you experienced with your previous legacy environment?
Yeah. So previous to Workday, running reports, getting data was very, took a long time. Being able to cut the data the way we wanted, it was very limited, very siloed, and Workday honestly opened up the floodgates to be able to run quick and accurate data. And so we had very limited visibility to trends. There was no intersectionality, no dimensionality. If you wanted to see the down orgs of departments, we just a lot of limitations.
Thank you for that. Diane, let me come over to you, and I'm going to kind of combine a couple of questions for you. So, you're in the professional services arena. Can you explain the importance of DEI in professional services? And then also, can you talk to some of the challenges supporting DEI over the last year or so? Because as you've mentioned, it was a challenging year last year. And I think those of us doing this work, we were challenged in new and different ways. But tell us some of the challenges you had over there at Huron.
Sure. So starting kind of with professional services. So as I mentioned, people are our business. So we don't have a widget. Our people are the center. They're the ones who bring the intelligence, the methodologies, the process into what we do for our clients, and how we deliver services. So ensuring that our folks feel connected, feel engaged is so important, because they bring their best selves to our clients and ultimately help our business and hopefully grow as individuals. So super important from that perspective. When I think about the challenges over the last 18 months, they've been both, and I think Carin, you said it as well, energizing but exhausting at the same time, because there has been a definitely renewed effort and a renewed interest in people. I'm saying, how do we help? How do we do things differently? How do we make a change? And change doesn't happen overnight. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is everybody wants to see that change immediately. That change takes time. So ensuring that we are staying the course and having information to make sure that we're doing that in a smart way, right? To making smart decisions. So being able to really think about that differently. So, when I think about Workday, what Workday has been able to bring to us, we just implemented Workday early this year. So we have just started to get the benefit of using Vibe and using the dashboards. But I will say it's been huge to be able to, share information, to get more information, to say, yes, these these initiatives, these programs are really making a difference, or, you know what, change course, because this isn't, we're not seeing a difference. So the challenges have been many, but I think challenges as well as very positive aspects, because we have seen that renewed energy by our people to be able to say, what do we do differently, and how do we get involved, and how do we help, change the world, change it from the inside out, and be able to do things differently and make sure that people do belong. So we do, it has been, again, both energizing and exhausting, but I think very positive.
Yeah, that's lots of really great nuggets in there. Thank you. So Sergio, let me come back to you for a second. New and modern tools can bring new capabilities to support DEI, as you know. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the new capabilities that are now possible at Western Governors University based on your transition over to Workday?
Yeah, great question. So we've been live for about 2 years now, and we recently implemented what's called the Vibe Dashboard, which is a reporting suite, has about 20 plus reports within it, different data points that have to do with that diverse DE&I. And so since we implemented that back in January, so almost over 6 months now. That has opened up intersectionality of how we look at data as a university as a whole, but also at the department level, to the point that during our ops planning this year, we were able to bring in D&I data, and for the first time, something we hadn't had at the department level. And so, like I said, being able to have quick, accurate data, reports that run within 30 seconds of quick data opens up opportunities, and we're able to have conversations a lot quicker as opposed to having to wait. And so we've also are in the process of implementing a tool called People Analytics, which has augmented analytics. And so there's a lot of opportunities there. We're still in the early stages, and we're excited to see where we go.
That's fantastic. Well, with People Analytics, as you know, you can also use the Vibe Index, which is coming pretty soon as well. And so for those of you who are not familiar with the Vibe Index, it's a new functionality that we're going to be putting out soon that really helps you understand parity in diversity across certain life cycles. And so it's a really cool tool to help you understand, as you think about those points of intersectionality, are people having a comparable experience? And so it's going to be a really, I'm really proud of what we've done in that area there. So Diane, let me come back over to you. So, I understand, because we were talking about this a little earlier, that Huron developed 5 actions to manage and measure DEI across programs. Can you tell us a little bit about those 5 actions you all came up with?
Sure. So we kind of recommitted to our framework, if you will, around DEI last year. And we committed to five actions, and that was to advance diverse representation across all levels, to expand the community outreach and support, to foster a more inclusive culture that encourages diversity, to strengthen our vendor processes and our supplier pool, and then to perform pay equity studies regularly. So when you look at those 5 commitments, it really kind of boils down to really 3 areas of strategic opportunity that we talk about. So it's really around recruiting, around development, and then community involvement. So 3 big buckets, but those are the 3 buckets that we're really focusing on and measuring. What are we doing, and how is that having an impact? So what are we doing around recruiting, and what are we doing differently that is maybe bringing in more diverse population? And then development. Development's key, right? Because we could bring in more diverse people every day of the week, but if we're not developing, if we're not helping people grow, if we're not putting support systems in place to do that, they will leave. So we have to make sure we have a huge emphasis on development, which we have continued to evolve. And then community. So what are we doing outside the walls? What are we doing to help with as individuals are growing in their career, as individuals are in school, internship programs, et cetera, what are we doing within the community? What are some of the non-for-profits that we're supporting that are helping to be more equitable across the world? So those are the 3 things, 3 areas of what we call strategic opportunity that we are really looking at measuring ourselves against, and then evolving. because not everything works, right? So making sure that we're saying, okay, this is working, or we're seeing a difference, let's continue to do that more, or this is not, so let's change. And that's where, Vibe has been helpful for us to say, yes, some of these things that we've done around recruiting are bringing in different types of individuals, or some of the things we're doing around development might not be changing the way people are staying or moving on to other organizations. So let's address those.
This last point that you just brought up is so critical, because DEI really is an iterative process, right? You try things, you fail, you learn, you get better, you try something new, you try something different. But because it's this long journey, really, that we're probably never going to get to the end of, right? You have to keep thinking about ways of reinventing and reinvigorating. And how can you continue to evolve over time as things change also? So that becomes a part. Let me ask you one question related to that before I switch back over to Sergio. Excuse me. And that is, can you talk to maybe what were some of your biggest challenges as you guys were thinking about your DEI strategy and how you were kind of continuing to go along your journey? Any important challenges that would be worth sharing with this group?
I think the biggest challenge, especially the last 18 months, were all, because we encourage our people to help us think about how do we do this differently? What should we be doing? So, it is, we have 10 employee resource groups across the organization, and we really engage in what should we be doing differently. So probably the biggest challenge was trying to filter through what are some of the things we could do that are going to have an impact? What are the things that might be nice to do, but might not be able to, really move the meter. So really being able to manage that, because they're all great ideas. But you can't do everything, right? And you have to kind of focus in on certain things. So that's probably been the biggest challenge, and keeping people engaged in those activities.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you for that. So Sergio, from your perspective, how have conversations changed over at your university? Like, what's been different, and how has even data or the conversation around DE&I just changed based on how we've been kind of going over the last several years?
Yeah, great question. So, like I said, we're still in the early. In the past year, we hired a VP of a Chief Diversity Officer, and so we're still in the early stages of our DE&I journey. But being able to provide data to our executives and stakeholders that's pertinent to their departments, that has allowed us to have a solid foundation of data. And so there's our stakeholders, they want more. They want to know, okay, what do we do now? Where do we take this? Because they see that it's pertinent to them. It's pertinent. It's not just it's not macro data. It's pertinent to their department, and so that's kind of where conversations are going. Is okay, what are we going to do now? What are the levers that we can do? And that's going to take training at the university level, which we're implementing, managers. Yeah, that's kind of where conversations are going in our journey. And so, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Sergio and Diane. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I am going to bring Stephanie and Samantha back into our conversation and see if there's any Q&A that the three of us can help answer.
Yes. First of all, thank you so very much, Carin, Diane, Sergio, for those insights to really set the tone for what DEI is, how it's being implemented, the different lenses around it. We have a number of audience questions, actually, so we'll try to get to as many as possible. The first one is for Sergio. How is Western Governors University looking at intersectionality, especially when you look at data, and what do you feel we could learn from?
Good question. So by implementing this Vibe dashboard, that opened up the door to be able to see things by department. So whoever the user is, if you're over 2,000 employees, you would see your DE&I data of your headcount, your hires, promotions, terminations. And being also, this reporting suite is extremely robust. And so there's a lot of data there. There's a lot of information. And so being able to, like Carin talked about, being able to see male, Asian, or female, Hispanic, being able to see the data in different lenses, you're able to see the areas of focus more clearly, and and that allows you to have a better plan of action.
Thanks, Sergio. Stephanie, I know we have some other questions rolling in, so over to you for the next.
We do indeed. We have a question for Diane. So pay equity is tough and important. How is the data helping you have those tough conversations with people who have benefited from pay inequality?
Great question. And I will say, and we have been doing pay equity studies for a while. And what we have found is it helps us in confirming what we believe, because we do them externally with economists, et cetera, confirming that we do have a strong pay. We do have a strong pay compensation philosophy. So, the good news is we haven't had to have many tough conversations, if any, because we have had consistency around our pay. But having that data and confirming is so important, and being able to then be able to action on it. If you do, so I would say, don't take on the pay equity stuff. You're not going to want to do anything about it. You have to be willing and committed to saying, okay, we're going to decide. If we find something from that study, we are going to take action on it to be able to, make sure those inequities don't appear or don't creep into the business, because, they can, because especially as you grow over time and bring people in from the externally, and as people grow internally, making sure that that's consistent. I'm proud of where we are and where we continue to be. But again, it's important to make sure you're using that data wisely and wanting to take action against it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diane. Back over to Sam.
Diane, I really appreciate that. Sergio, too, and this audience and the questions that you're asking and how they center around data. Data is actually going to be, I think, a key part of so many conversations we have today around reshaping wicked challenges. There's data and there's anecdote, and usually somewhere in between is this area where, the sweet spot, where the truth lives, where action can happen. So this next question is actually for you, Carin. The audience member who asked it recognizes that DEI takes time. So do you have any advice when quick action is needed?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, quick action has been needed on a lot of things over this past year. So look, I would say that listen to the energy of the folks around you, right? So if you feel like there is something that is spurring up and there's a lot of energy and people are talking about it, that's probably an issue that you need to address sooner rather than later. A couple of examples of that is, during the George Floyd murder last year, right? Your Black populations may have been popping up saying, hey, companies, you need to do something about this. When Asian hate happened earlier this year, or when Jewish hate happened earlier this year, our employees were saying, you need to help us address these issues, right? So we listen to where the energy is, and then we focus there. The other thing too is, when we're leveraging data, we're able to scan what's happening on a very, very regular basis. And so for us, we do something that we call Best Workday surveys, where we actually survey our employees every Friday. And that allows us to stay on top of what's really happening within our internal community and what are issues that we need to address. And so we can react pretty quickly to what our employees are telling us. So just think about something like the pandemic, where, your caregiver, people were saying, employees were saying, we need more help, and so those are things that we can do pretty quickly based on the data that we have.
Thanks, Carin. Stephanie, I know we have a couple others and 2 minutes left, so have at it.
Excellent. So let's see, policy recommendations. Can you just talk through what you would, big picture, suggest as we have a group here that is looking at policy recommendations? And that's to anyone in the group.
Give me an example of policy recommendation.
Oh, good question. Sam, do we have an example?
Yeah, so one such example might be, and this is a K-12 example, admittedly, I think when BYOD, or bring your own device, kind of started becoming a really big trend, it exacerbated the fact that not every student or every family had devices. And even if they did, it, wasn't at the same level, wasn't the same amount of digital fluency. So as we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, we know that access doesn't always equal equity. So any, recommendations you might have to policymakers who might be tuning in making decisions, especially things that we've learned during the pandemic.
What I would just add to this is we've got to figure out a way to remove the barriers that are creating these inequities in our communities. And so whether that is making sure that we are doing more investment in those communities, whatever it is, and if that's financial, it could be, even things like, how do we leverage companies to come in and mentor students, perhaps in some of these underserved areas? We have to get not just our policymakers, but we also have to get our companies and our communities around us involved in helping to remove some of these barriers as well. So I think it's how do we think about us coming together as a group to solve some of these issues, as opposed to just expecting that they're going to be solved in one place or another. This is a big one I think that we have to stay on top of, especially when it comes to our educational institutions at this particular time, right? We have a lot of opportunity for our younger kids, for sure.
Thank you so much. This is perfect. We have one last question. And actually, this has come up in some other incarnations across the week. But faculty and the role faculty play here is really important. So any recommendations from any panelists on how to bring faculty into the conversations and activities around bolstering DEI?
I'll jump in again and say, I think it's critical that you bring in all elements who are important to the conversation, including faculty. Faculty, you actually can't have a DEI conversation without faculty, right? And so you've got to bring those folks into the fold because they have a perspective, your students have a perspective, and you merge those things together and you can solve for a lot of things. But when we're not talking to each other and we don't understand the multiple perspectives from the different vantage points, we're actually, it's harder for us to get to solutions that work for everyone. So when I talk about earlier, when I talked about vibe for all, it really is for all. We all have to come together and solve some of these challenges. And you certainly can't do it in your institutions without faculty. Bring them in, have those conversations, and don't shy away from the hard conversations either, right? Talk about the stuff that really matters.
And I would just add, not only the stuff that matters, but it's going to be uncomfortable, right? People will be uncomfortable, and that's okay. Having everybody involved in the conversations and doing a lot of listening too, right? Not trying to jump to solutions, but listening is so key, and everybody needs to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a great joy listening and learning from all of you today. I want to thank you, Carin, Sergio, Diane, for enlightening us this morning. I really appreciate, for an unconference that is centered around learning in the digital age. I always love that this group brings forward the non-technology issues, knowing that technology is simply an enabler. So I think that you've shown a light some really important issues today that we need to listen to, understand, and begin to solve together. So thank you so much, Workday, for your time. Thank you, Diane, Sergio, Carin. And hope to see you later on today in our working sessions.